The side effect most people expect with Retatrutide is nausea. But one of the most unusual signals in the human trials was not a stomach symptom at all. It was an altered, sometimes unpleasant sensation called dysesthesia. In this investigation, I'll show you what that word actually means, how often the signal appeared across different human trials, and what the evidence still cannot tell us. Here is the first number that changes the story. In Triumph 1, about 1 in 8 participants in the highest studied group reported dysesthesia. With placebo, it was about 1 in 100. The public trial report described these events as generally mild to moderate. The majority resolved during treatment, and most participants continued. That is reassuring, but it does not make the signal meaningless. It has now appeared across several controlled trials, and the rate is not the same in every population. So the real question is not, does Retatrutide cause weird sensations? The better question is, what exactly has been established? What is still preliminary? And where does internet panic outrun the data? I'm Sheriff Elgindy, and welcome to Peptide IQ, where peptide and GLP-1 claims are investigated through human evidence, not hype. Retatrutide is still investigational. As of this recording, it is not approved by the FDA or any other regulatory agency. Lilly says it is legally available only through its clinical trials. The company says it plans to submit for US approval in the first quarter of 2027. But a submission is not an approval. This video is for education only and is not medical advice. Speak with a qualified clinician about your own treatment response, side effects, blood glucose, nutrition, body composition changes, and safety risks. We are investigating published human evidence here, not giving treatment instructions. And that brings us back to the useful question: which safety patterns repeat in humans? Which ones are common? Which ones are unusual? And which conclusions are simply not mature enough yet? First, the familiar part. Across the Retatrutide program, the most common adverse events are gastrointestinal, nausea, diarrhea, constipation, vomiting. In Triumph 1, nausea was reported by a little over 4 in 10 participants in the highest studied group. The other stomach-related events were also clearly more common than with placebo, and you can see the full trial arm percentages on screen. But here is the first interpretation trap. A percentage tells you how often an event was reported. It does not tell you by itself how intense it was, whether it lasted, or whether it forced someone to stop treatment. The public Phase 3 reports generally describe the gastrointestinal events as mild to moderate, and in the peer-reviewed Transcend T2D1 diabetes trial, the most frequent gastrointestinal events were also generally mild to moderate and subsided over time. That does not mean they were unimportant. Gastrointestinal events were the most common reason for treatment discontinuation in Triumph 1. So when someone says, it's only nausea, they are compressing 3 different questions into one. How common was it? How severe was it? And did it change whether participants could stay on treatment? Peptide IQ mini verdict. Gastrointestinal side effects are established. But common does not mean trivial, and common does not automatically mean severe. Now, the unusual part. The word dysesthesia sounds more frightening than it is understandable. The National Cancer Institute defines dysesthesia as a distortion of sensation, especially touch. An ordinary stimulus can feel unpleasant or painful. Sensation can also be reduced. Think of the touch system as a signal line. The message is still traveling, but what reaches awareness can feel distorted, a little like clean audio developing static. That analogy is not a claim about the mechanism. It is simply a way to understand the symptom, and this distinction matters. Dysesthesia is a description of what someone feels. It is not, by itself, a diagnosis of permanent nerve injury. The Retatrutide trials have not established that this signal means permanent neuropathy. They also have not yet explained exactly why some participants reported it and others did not. So, when you see a post that jumps directly from altered sensation to nerve damage, the conclusion has traveled much further than the evidence. Peptide IQ mini verdict. The symptom signal is real. The permanent nerve damage interpretation is unsupported. The next question is whether this was a one-off curiosity. It was not. In the Phase 2 obesity trial, related altered sensation terms, cutaneous hyperesthesia and skin sensitivity, were reported in 7% of participants receiving retatrutide, compared with 1% on placebo. Then came Phase 3. TRIUMPH-4 reported dysesthesia in roughly 1 in 5 participants in its highest studied group, compared with less than 1% on placebo. TRIUMPH-1 later reported a lower rate than that, about 1 in 8 in the highest group, but again clearly above placebo. In the peer-reviewed Transcend T2D1 diabetes trial, the rates were lower again, roughly 2 to 4.5% across the retatrutide groups, and 0 in placebo. And in July, TRIUMPH-2 and TRIUMPH-3 again reported more dysesthesia with retatrutide than placebo. Different studies, different populations, different exact rates. The same broad safety signal keeps reappearing. That is why I would not dismiss dysesthesia as a statistical oddity, but I would also not use the highest percentage as if it were the universal risk for every future patient. Peptide IQ mini-verdict. Repeated controlled human signal, established. Universal personal risk number, misleading. So which number is the real dysesthesia rate? 21%? 12.5%? Or closer to 4%? The honest answer is that they are all real results from different trials. They are not interchangeable. Think of them like weather reports from different cities. A temperature in London and a temperature in Dubai can both be accurate, but you would not average them and call that your personal forecast. The retatrutide trials enrolled different populations. Some focused on obesity without diabetes. One focused on type 2 diabetes. Another enrolled people with severe obesity and established cardiovascular disease. Follow-up length differed, event coding and public reporting detail differed, and some results are peer-reviewed, while others are still company-reported top-line data. Any of those differences can change what gets observed, but the public evidence does not let us assign exactly how much each factor explains. So the correct use of the cross-trial matrix is not which trial had the safest number, it is, does the signal reproduce, and what still needs a direct explanation? Peptide IQ mini-verdict? Compare patterns across trials. Do not turn separate trials into a personal risk ranking. Now we can ask the obvious question. Does dysesthesia simply increase as the studied dose gets higher? Some of the data make that story look tempting. TRIUMPH-4 showed a much larger rate in its higher studied group. TRIUMPH-1 also showed a stronger signal in the higher groups, but the other trials break the staircase. Transcend T2D1 did not show a clean step-by-step rise. In TRIUMPH-3, the reported dysesthesia rate was the same in the two retatrutide groups, and even adverse event discontinuation in TRIUMPH-2 was not perfectly ordered by the studied dose. So the most defensible answer is this. Exposure may be part of the story, but one simple dose rule does not explain every dataset. Population, duration, reporting, and chance may also contribute. We do not yet know how much. That is exactly why this video reports trial groups, but does not turn them into a dosing guide. Quick question for the pinned comment. Which part needs the clearest follow-up? 1. Stomach effects. 2. Unusual sensations. Or 3. Why people stopped treatment. Just comment 1, 2, or 3. I'll put the evidence map underneath. Now to the question viewers usually care about most. Did these side effects make people stop treatment? In TRIUMPH-1, adverse events led to discontinuation in 11.3% of participants in the highest studied group, compared with 4.9% on placebo. That sounds important, and it is, but here is the attribution trap. Those are discontinuations from all adverse events combined. They do not tell us that dysesthesia caused most of them. In the detailed TRIUMPH-1 presentation, gastrointestinal adverse events were the most common reason for discontinuation. The reported range was about 2 to 5% across the retatrutide groups, versus about 1% with placebo, and Lilly reported that dysesthesia in TRIUMPH-4 was generally mild and rarely led to discontinuation. In TRIUMPH-1, most participants reporting dysesthesia continued treatment. TRIUMPH-2 and TRIUMPH-3 also show why we should not oversimplify. Adverse event discontinuation was higher in some retatrutide groups, but the pattern was not a perfect staircase, so more people stopped because of adverse events is a supported statement. Dysesthesia made most people stop is not. Peptide IQ mini-verdict. Discontinuation is a real tolerability outcome. Cause attribution must stay within what the trial actually reported. Safety language has another trap. Unusual, severe, and serious are not synonyms. Severe describes intensity. Serious is an outcome-based regulatory category. The FDA uses serious for outcomes such as death, a life-threatening event, hospitalization, significant disability, or another medically important event. That is why an unfamiliar sensation can feel intense without automatically being classified as a serious adverse event. And the reverse is also true. A medically serious event is not defined by how dramatic the symptom sounds. In Triumph 1, the overall percentage of serious adverse events was higher in the Retatrutide groups than in placebo. You can see the exact range on screen. But an adverse event table does not automatically prove that the study drug caused every event in that table. Causality is a separate question. For dysesthesia specifically, the public Phase 3 reports generally describe events as mild to moderate, with many resolving during treatment. That is useful information. It is not the same as saying the symptom is irrelevant, and it is not the same as saying the long-term question is closed. Dysesthesia is unusual, but it is not the only safety signal worth watching. In the Phase 2 obesity trial, heart rate increased in a dose-dependent pattern, peaked around week 24, and then declined later in the study. The investigators noted that the increases were similar to those reported with GLP-1 receptor agonists. That does not prove long-term cardiovascular harm. It does mean heart rate is a separate physiological signal that belongs in the safety picture. Phase 3 has added other observations. In the detailed Triumph 1 presentation, urinary tract infections were somewhat more common in the Retatrutide groups than placebo, were mostly reported in women, and were generally mild to moderate, resolved during treatment, and did not lead to discontinuation. Reported hypotension was also listed among adverse events of special interest, and it was more common in participants taking blood pressure lowering medicines. Notice the wording. These are observations being tracked. A trial can show that an event occurred more often. That is not automatically the same as proving the drug caused every event or predicting who will experience it. Peptide IQ mini-verdict. The safety profile is broader than nausea and broader than dysesthesia. Some signals are established as observations. Their long-term meaning may still be preliminary. And that leads to the biggest limitation. Controlled trials are excellent at detecting repeated safety signals under defined conditions. They are not the same as years of real-world pharmacovigilance after approval. Think of a clinical trial as a bright spotlight on selected participants for a defined period. Real-world safety is more like turning on the lights across an entire city. More people, more health conditions, more medicines, and much longer follow-up. Retatrutide has not reached that stage. We now have strong Level 4 controlled human evidence across several trials. We do not yet have Level 6 post-approval real-world safety evidence, because there is no approved product in routine use, and several specific questions remain open. Does dysesthesia persist in a small subgroup? Can it recur after resolving? Are there clear predictors? Does it relate to exposure, weight loss rate, or something else? Will the full peer-reviewed Phase 3 publications change the interpretation? And what happens when a much broader population is followed for years rather than months? So anyone saying the long-term safety is proven is ahead of the data. Anyone saying this definitely causes permanent nerve damage is also ahead of the data. The evidence is mature enough to identify the signal. It is not mature enough to close the long-term question. So here is the Peptide IQ verdict. Established, gastrointestinal adverse events are common in Retatrutide trials. Established, dysesthesia is a repeated controlled human safety signal that occurred more often with Retatrutide than placebo across several trials. That does not establish permanent nerve damage. Preliminary, the mechanism, who is most susceptible, whether the symptom can persist or recur, and its long-term real-world importance. Preliminary, the long-term meaning of heart rate changes, and some of the other safety observations being followed as Phase 3 matures. Unsupported, that one simple dose rule predicts dysesthesia, that dysesthesia proves permanent neuropathy, or that it caused most adverse event discontinuations. Misleading, saying Retatrutide side effects are just nausea, or treating one trial percentage as one person's forecast. The signal is real. The scary interpretation is not proven, and the long-term answer is unfinished. But side effects are only one side of the retatrutide story. If it is doing more than lowering the number on the scale, what other benefits are actually supported by human evidence, especially for liver fat, visceral fat, and metabolic health? That is exactly what we investigate next. Retatrutide beyond weight loss. If this investigation helped you understand the evidence behind retatrutide side effects, press like, subscribe to Peptide IQ, and share it with someone following the retatrutide story. I'm Shui Felgendi. Stay curious, question the marketing, and always follow the evidence.